Welcome to Bosses with Baggage. I'm Sherry Sutton, your host and business growth guide. Around here, we believe that failures are our superpowers. So in this podcast, we'll explore the many ways that setbacks can mold, shape, and change your life and your business and ensure that you come out of the fire better than before. Through interviews with business leaders and discussions of my own personal struggles, we'll unlock the secrets to turning setbacks and low moments into opportunities to thrive. From approaching your business with a servant's heart to getting comfortable with being the face of your brand, each episode will be a safe, judgment-free zone to reframe the concept of failure with honesty, empathy, grace, and a whole lot of laughter. So are you ready? Let's go. So excited to be here with Mindi, also known as Fenix. I have been stalking her online for, I think we've been like circulating each other for a couple years online. And I just love everything about you. And so I'm so excited to say hi to you. So welcome.
Thank you so much. It's been such a wild ride. I think you first piqued my attention because your profile picture, I mean, you just exude joy and your personality is just so bubbly and fun. And that's just not something that you see very much in the online space. So I think it's just a mutual thing that we have going on, the energetic exchange. It's so fun.
Oh, thank you. I mean, it's hard earned, right? And that's what, this whole podcast is about, is this idea of, we all have baggage, right? We're all broken. We're all imperfect. And I really want to share stories of people who are perfectly imperfect, right? Just like me, I'm very open about my journey with all sorts of stuff, codependence and addiction. And so I'm so excited to hear a little bit more about your journey. I know just a little bit, and I know it was a doozy. And so I really want to share what that looked like, how you became the Phoenix rising out of it, and how you've really turned your life to being one of service, because they follow you online. Your whole vibe is like, I just want to support other entrepreneurs, other women to really embrace who they are. So tell us a little bit about what happened.
Well, that's a whole mouthful right there. There's so much that we could go over in such a short period of time. But first of all, I just want to acknowledge you for what you're doing, because I really think that human connection is something that everybody craves in a world that's so fragmented and disconnected with social media, even though it's a very powerful thing. And also the fact that you're really wanting to bring forward the stories of people who have experienced, trauma and tragedy, and who have alchemized it into something that's really powerful and purposeful and impactful to others. Because so much of our time we spend in this facade of wanting to project this perfect version of ourselves, or that we're trying to achieve perfection in some form or fashion, when in reality, for my own self, what I found is that it really is the imperfection that I find myself very connected to. And so I'm this huge proponent that imperfection creates connection. So why are we even striving for perfect? Why are we not being more bold about sharing the imperfect, the messiness of our lives? Because it is in that helps create this beautiful connection between other humans, and that tells us that we aren't alone in whatever it is that we're going through. I definitely went through a time in my life, actually numerous times, where I felt like I was extremely alone. I was going through very dark things. I was going through very deep depression, where even though I'm someone who is all about, finding a positive spin on things, I was finding myself in a life that was very filled with shame. I had a lot of guilt about a lot of things. There were a lot of parts of myself in my life that I didn't feel like I could share, because I felt like people would abandon me, they would reject me, they would judge and criticize me. And I was someone who was also very involved in the church, and I had a very I would say there was a lot of religious oppression in my past. And so when you filter it from all of these different lenses that we kind of put on ourselves based on, childhood, how you were brought up, or society, people's expectations, and you're someone who cares about people, you can isolate yourself, which amplifies that feeling of loneliness and depression. So I have made the intentional choice to share parts of myself, my story, my journey that do have a lot of shame attached, and I did have a lot of criticism, and I did lose friends, and all of the worst fears that you have about sharing those parts of your life, they did happen to me. And so, I can't be someone that's like, oh, this will never happen. If you start being open about your story, these things, all of your besties are going to stay by your side and everything's still going to be amazing and all of that. It has been a very rough ride. But what I have found, there's a quote that I absolutely love that I live by that says, sharing your story can be the key that unlocks someone else's prison. So I made the intentional choice to be more open and transparent about the things that many people would want to keep hidden in their closets and shoved under the rug, specifically with the intention that I imagine some other woman or man out there, feeling like they're crying so hard that their insides could come out, and feeling so alone, so hopeless, so helpless, um, that I mean, quite honestly, I had the suicidal thoughts and all of those things. And so I want to share my story so that someone out there might hear this and say, oh my gosh, like me too. I'm not alone. There is hope. And, there are brighter days. So that really is why I show up in spaces like this with that intention.
Yeah. And I think the more we hear other people share their brokenness and their shame, the easier our shame gets, right? I think we've spent so much time trying to be perfect, right? And it just we're just not. And no one is. And social media can add to that sometimes, but I also am a firm believer that social media can be an opportunity for us to share our brokenness and the things that are wrong with us and to have real conversations, because it's meant to be a place where we can have conversation. So let's change the narrative and make it about these real conversations where we share our shame, we share our brokenness, we share, our suicidal thoughts. Because if we can talk about it, then you're right, somebody can say me too. And I think that's one of the things the Me Too movement brought us as sort of an extension of that, is not only talking about the wrongs that were done to us, but also talking about just our own journeys and owning our own journeys and being okay with it and saying, if you don't like my journey and you're not okay with it, I don't want you in my life.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah, I think
I
it's
know we were
important.
talking about that a little bit before the podcast. Like, sometimes we get into rooms and we tell that, we start telling our story and people get freaked out, right? Because they're like, whoa, this is too much. And, you have you're too big, you're too emotional, this is, it's often hitting their triggers. We're hitting their triggers by sharing our stuff, and they, aren't really able to deal with it. And so there's always this question of, are we the ones that need to change, or do we keep doing what we're doing and saying, this is the story and I'm going to attract the people who need to hear this, as you said earlier, so that they can live a better life. And I know that I'm doing a service by being that. And I'm sorry that, this isn't something that you can handle, but I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing because I believe in it so strongly. And I think that's one of the things I admire about you.
Ooh, I love that. That definitely resonates with me, as you know, very strongly, because I am someone who has often, I mean, countless times been told that I'm too much, I'm too sensitive, I'm too deep. I get told a lot, it's not that deep, Mindy. It's just not that deep. And I'm like, you don't understand. For me, it is. I am a very deep person. I love deeply. I feel deeply. I'm an ultra sensitive person. I cry at Hallmark commercials. And yes, I have that badass side of me. And I also have, it's kind of like having the duality of being able to hold the light and the dark, being able to hold the this strong feeling of love, and also being able to experience intense pain in the extreme. And a lot of people don't, they just weren't born that way. They don't have it in their DNA, and so they can't really understand, which can oftentimes make you feel even more weird or like a black sheep. I mean, I'm someone who have always felt like I didn't really fit in wherever I went. I felt like, even though people would connect with me easily and they're like, oh my gosh, you people want to hang out with you and you can be the life of the party, and people love to be in your energy and all of that, because you have this aura where people feel very seen, they feel very safe, you have this presence about you that make people want to share their stories. But at the same time, there oftentimes people, what I've found is that not everybody has the capacity to see you in the same depth that you see others, and that can make you feel like you want to shrink back, and like you want to kind of not be truly the fullest expression of yourself, because when you've done that, you found that to be unsafe because of how people have responded to it. And so I definitely want to be a voice for people who are like me, like you, to say that you aren't too much, and that your story does have value, that you do have value, that you might be made to feel like you're too much by people who can't really, like just like you said, you can trigger people who sharing what you share could trigger people if they aren't really ready to hear what you have to say. And I have compassion for that, I have sensitivity for that, but at the same time, there are people who really, it's like they're needing that breath of oxygen, and your story can be that breath of oxygen that someone is needing to be able to hear. So I do show up, even though sometimes I am judged for what I say, or I'm even told that I shouldn't be saying what I'm saying, that the content that I sometimes cover in my interviews is very ugly and very dark, and I get it. I've freaking lived it. So I
Mhm.
know that it is too much. But there's also a quote that I love that says, you can't say the right thing to the wrong person or the wrong thing to the right person. So I love that. And that is why I share, to help set people free, to help bring healing to people who have been through those dark paths. And I absolutely have. And the extent that you want to go into it, I'm perfectly fine with, or we can do surface level, whatever it is that you feel, I'm cool with.
Yeah, I mean, this is called bosses with baggage. So we like to really hear it because again, like the whole goal of this thing is like let's be willing to share those deep dark moments. And so yeah, I want to hear more about your story.
Yeah, so I'll try to give sort of the Cliff Notes overview to paint the picture of why I'm even here, and why I have been able to transmute the things that have happened. How did that even happen? Because it doesn't just happen. People don't go through stuff and just magically transform into someone who has been able to transform into something powerful and impactful versus staying a victim, right? So it all comes down to choices, it comes down to decisions. There are many things that have happened to us or in our lives that we didn't necessarily have control over. Many of us are victims of things that have happened to us, but we all do get to choose what we do with it. And so it's kind of like going back to how did this even, what is my story? And I feel like a lot of that starts for many of us with our childhood, because we're told certain things, we're taught certain things. And I had a very, I don't want to shame anybody. I'm big about, really wanting to have compassion even for parents and, siblings and whoever, but my story is my story. And I did have a lot of negativity about me planted into me as a child. I was told I was stupid. I was good for nothing. I was a fat pig. I would never amount to anything. That if any guy was ever stupid enough to marry me, that they would guarantee a divorce within 5 years. I could not wait to get out of my house. So at the stroke of 18, I moved out. I got pregnant soon after. I had married someone from church. And so by the time I turned 19, just after my 19th birthday, I had my first daughter. And then a couple years later, when I was 21, police showed up at our house and arrested my then husband, and he was put in prison. And so, it was a tragedy. I mean, my daughter was only 2. Most people at 21 are partying and, graduating from college and just barely starting their lives. And I was a single mom with a toddler. And also having to navigate the complexities of the situation, obviously, and all of the criticism, all of the, you know, um, people being having their business in my life, and all of that. It was very hard, and I definitely was very young to be going through something like that. So I had to move back in with my parents, have someone to help watch my daughter while I went back to work. I had been a stay-at-home mom at that point. So went back to work, and 2.5 years later, I reconnected with someone that was a family friend of ours. Our sisters were best friends when they were kids, so this was not a complete stranger, even though we hadn't been connected in a long time. And so I figured I had learned a few things. I had been around the block. This was not my first rodeo. So I remarried 2.5 years later, and he had a son that he brought into the relationship, and we ended up adding 2 children to our family over the next few years. And this relationship ended up being exponentially worse than the first one, but it was a slow fade. It wasn't something that happened overnight. As many of these things do, you don't go into a situation like that with knowing what you do at the end of it, right? So a lot of women end up in toxic relationships or abusive relationships without any knowledge, obviously, of like it's going to turn out to be this way. So I say that for 2 reasons. One of them is because so many women end up with these dynamics, and they are heavily criticized. And it's like a lot of people will judge those women and say, why did you not leave? Why are you not leaving? Or why did you put up with this? How did you end up with it? I would never end up in a situation like that. And it's like, I have so much compassion for these women because, for one thing, I would have never dreamed that I would be living the life that I ended up living in my second marriage. It was, like I said, exponentially worse. And also, I was someone who would judge other women because I didn't understand. I didn't understand all of the nuances and all of the complexities that happen in these manipulative. Oftentimes, you're dealing with personalities that have elements that are very unique. They can be narcissistic and sociopaths and be absolute masters at manipulation. And not every toxic relationship has those dynamics, but if you are in one, people who haven't been through that and haven't navigated it really don't have the capacity to understand, from my opinion, in my perspective, have the capacity to really understand all of the complexities about that. You can cast judgments and say, oh, this could never happen to me. I would never put up with that. And you just don't know unless you're literally living someone's exact same situation, which is impossible because there are so many different, aspects that can go into that personality and all of that. It's impossible. So don't judge, have compassion for women who are in these situations. And also, if you are a woman in that or who has ever been through that, I think we can be really hard on ourselves, and we can, feel like, why didn't I see this? Or how did I miss this? Or whatever. And you can really judge yourself heavily and be very hateful and have a lot of hate talk towards yourself. And you probably, if you've been in a relationship like that, have had a lot of negative things spoken over you, saying you're stupid and been very mentally and emotionally, or perhaps even physically beat down. So I'll pause there. If there's anything you want to add, I would love to have a conversation about anything you want.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. I mean, not amazing, it's terrible, but amazing that, like, it's so interesting. I think I was in a very emotionally abusive relationship, and I think sometimes it's this awful combination of our own brokenness that we bring in and our own codependence. Because if we were raised, like you were, and I get that too, then we attract those narcissistic personalities, right, who end up controlling. And then we don't know how to, we don't have when you're raised with parents who aren't able to help you harness your own voice, it
Mhm.
takes so long to find it. And we end up finding people who we continue to stifle that voice, and we get it. If you get into those situations, God forbid, and you haven't learned how to use your voice, it's awful. I've been in it, and you just feel suffocated
Mm.
all the time.
Yeah, for sure.
I
And I
don't know
think
if you
there's
relate
different
with that
levels.
idea. Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely different levels of, not to dismiss anybody's experience whatsoever, but there are extremes. There's some toxic relationships that are, I would say, on the more again, not trying to dismiss anything, but there are the extremes where you're literally, your life is being threatened, and there's violence, or there's threats of violence, and then there's also just the toxic side where there are two people who have unhealed wounds, and there are very unhealthy dynamics in the relationship, but you're not physically threatened, you're not physically harmed, and not to say that any of that is okay, but none of it is okay, number one. And I agree that, okay, so what I'm going to say right now, I'm going to stop for a second and just kind of fast forward and give you the whole situation. That relationship that I talked about, my second marriage, that one also ended with my husband being put in prison. So this ended up two times being married to someone who ended up being a criminal. There was no way that I could have known that they would turn out to be the people that they were. Like I said, one of them, like, maybe didn't mention this. I think I mentioned that I had met the first one at church. He was a theology major. He was an assistant pastor before I met him. The second one was a family friend, so this was not just some random person, that I met online, although lots of people have successful relationships of people that they met online. So I'm not dissing that. I'm just kind of trying to paint the picture that there was no way that I could have ever known that these people would turn out to be the way that they were. However, lightning striking twice in such a dramatic way. And in this second scenario, like I said, it was numerous times worse than the first relationship. So I did have to do some of that self-analysis to say, okay, I had a lot of guilt, for one thing, of like, how could this happen? And then also being able to ask myself those hard questions of, even though I didn't know any of this, even though I can't take personal responsibility, even though as women, we oftentimes take way more responsibility for things that aren't even ours to own. But what happened? Like, how did this happen? How did I attract two people that ended up with these types of dynamics? And so I do want to highlight some things that you said there, because um, in my case, I was definitely able to pinpoint that these personalities tend to hone in on women who are insecure, who are naive, who are kind, who have hearts that want to help and to serve, who have strong empathy qualities. And these are all beautiful things. That's the tricky thing about it, because you can be a beautiful soul of a person and have a kind heart and have empathy and have so much love for people, and truly want to help, and you want to make a difference. But that combined with insecurity, low self-esteem, um, having some of those wounds of abandonment, or, that you oftentimes pick up in your physical trail of life in your childhood, that combination is like a bomb waiting to explode. If it happens to land in the hands of someone who has some of those tendencies of, which I know the term narcissism is very loosely used and oftentimes miscategorized, but let's just say, it's accurately categorized in my case and many other women's case. I'm not saying I'm alone in this, but um it's a time bomb, and it's like the perfect storm for all of the stuff that happened in my world. And so, and there are so many different ways and nuances about how these things take place. And oh, by the way, when I smile and I'm talking about all of this, it is not because it's fun to talk about. Sometimes I've happened to peek at one of my videos and I'm like, girl, you look like a B word. You look so serious. So I try to make my face look a little bit less
Ah,
intense. Okay. So that's why I'm smiling, is to look a little bit less intense, because these things are not easy to talk about. But anyways, it is it is so multifaceted. In my case, it was not an overtly abusive thing. It was playing and preying on my empathy, on my kindness. I had qualities in myself that, because I wanted to help and I wanted to make a difference, I had that rescue complex. I wanted to be that, person that helped. And so that was something that ended up getting very manipulated, very used. And when I did start to have, kind of like some questions, if I would ever question anything, it was like I was stupid. Why are you being so insecure? Why are you, you're causing all of the issues in our relationship because you have this suspicious personality. And of course, because of what happened with my first husband, I learned to be a little bit more like trying to add up things, and does this make sense? And I did have a little bit more of a suspicious nature because of what I went through, and so that was used against me. It's like, well, yeah, you're just projecting your issues from your first relationship onto this relationship, so again, you're the problem. Or it would be pitched to me as, of course you're suspicious, of course you're insecure, look what your first relationship did to you. And so it was kind of like this balance of, oh, he's being so understanding because, my first relationship was like this, or he's being super critical because my first relationship added on some baggage and some drama. And so it's I'm the problem because I'm now bringing in this baggage and this drama into this relationship. And so I'm now the problem that's creating all of our issues. So it was like there wasn't really a way to argue with it because all of those points seemed very valid to me. But the relationship itself, I mean, we had so many problems where I was constantly trying to fix the issues in the family. And we ended up having to, our homes were foreclosed and filing bankruptcy and losing everything, and I was the one that always had to figure out how we were going to make it and how we were going to get the money. And so I felt like I had another child. It didn't feel like a partnership. I felt like I was the one that needed to keep the family afloat. And so it just graduated into more and more things. He uh, begged me to go to therapy. And so I was at one point seeing 3 different therapists because, had all these problems that were causing all of these issues in the marriage. And so I was, being tried on all these medications. And I was like, I must, am I truly crazy? I didn't feel like I was crazy, but I was like, am I crazy? Because like it was really hard to argue against all of the things that he was saying. Um, so anyways, we I'm kind of like trying to hit all of the cliff notes in this to mention parts that I think a lot of women might be able to resonate with. But it did ultimately get much darker. He went into his own, he started to threat suicide all the time. He bought a gun, and he would carry the gun, he would keep it with him all the time, which most people would say, how could you even allow that? It's not that I allowed it. You get into a position where it's almost like you don't have a choice because there's threats, right? And we had kids, and it's like, because we had kids, I didn't want the gun in the house. And so the one time that I tried to get the gun out of the house, that was the first time that I did feel threat for my life. Everything was taken away. My phone was taken away. I had no way of communicating to anybody that I was scared. He wouldn't let me out of the house. I was physically restrained. I was threatened, about what would be done to me if I did do anything. So it was like, you learn that you have to stay, you have to mind your P's and Q's and keep the environment just so, or what could happen to my kids. I was so scared of what would happen to the kids if I tried anything. And I was threatened, that if I tried anything, that, I would be harmed. And if you ever, one thing that he said was, if you ever try to leave me, don't think I'm going to make it easy on you. I'm going to make your life a living hell. And we had the kids, and 2 of them were very little at the time. And not that it matters the age or anything, but I was so scared at the thought of, if I did split up, then if we have 50-50 custody, what's going to happen? I was terrified at that thought. So it was very, very tricky. He would send me GPS coordinates about, here's our vehicle. If I don't feel like I can take life anymore. And so here's where you can find the car when I shoot myself. It was all of these things. So I'm sharing those things, even though it doesn't feel good at all, but I'm sharing it because women, I feel like, really need to be educated about these things that are happening. Because you show up for church, you're smiling. I was very involved in the church. I was singing and I was doing all the things and volunteering at the school. And yet these things were happening at home that other people didn't know about. And he was very charismatic. He was very well known. He was very involved in the church. Many people knew him and respected him. And so it was kind of one of those things of who's going to believe you if you do say anything. So that's one thing that I think a lot of women, one of the reasons why they don't talk is because of the threats, because they feel like they're stuck, they're in a hopeless, helpless situation. And also, who would believe you if you did say something? Because these people can be very prominent in the community. They can oftentimes be church people, political people, serving in the community as, I don't know, police officer. I'm not saying everybody's like that. So please don't misconstrue what I'm saying. I'm just saying that sometimes the people literally have a lot of power. And so these dynamics can be very tricky to navigate, to know how, as a woman, how do you even approach something like that?
Yeah. Yeah. So now you've got 2 husbands in jail and 4 kids.
Well,
So
my
then what?
yeah, yeah. Well, my first husband, he only got the
One of
18
them, was he
months.
still spending time with his mom? Your step kid?
The My stepson had moved back to his mom, so he was not with us at the time. And so we had 3, I had my 3 together. I had my daughter from my first marriage and then the 2 little ones that we had added to the family. So when my second husband was put in prison, my younger 2, I think were 5 and 6 at the time. So the situation around that did end up very, very ugly. We had to move out of the house immediately. So we were homeless for about 3 months. We had to bounce from friend to friend until I was able to get us into a place of our own. And, everybody was in therapy. I mean, it was mass chaos. And at the same time, me as a mother, I'm trying to hold it all together, experiencing some of the worst betrayals of my life, people creating rumors, my best friend abandoned me, some of my family stopped talking to me, and so much heavy criticism because even though none of his behavior or anything was my fault or I was in any way involved in it, you get lumped in just by being married to someone, people saying, how in the world, how could you not know all these things? So it was the most, I'm a very wordy person and I can't even find words to describe the level of pain, the level of horror, the level of living your worst nightmare, and feeling like nobody, like who has my back? Um, who can I turn to? Meanwhile, trying to make sure that all of my children are okay because they just, it's like having to have that conversation with my younger 2 that your dad's not coming back and it's a death for them. He was there one day and now he's gone. That was the most horrible conversation I have ever had to have. In their little minds, they can't understand, so trying to put it in language that, it was a mess, a mess. Um, Definitely wouldn't wish it on anybody, but I want to kind of like shift at this point. And of course, I have
Yeah,
those
that'd be
gut
great.
wrenching cries. And of course, feeling like, how did this happen? Feeling like all those things that were spoken over to me as a child, you're a failure, you'll never amount to anything, you're not good enough, like you're not going to have a successful marriage, like all of it. I felt like the most epic failure of a human that could possibly be in existence. I felt like the oxygen that I breathed, I was not worthy of. I felt like the molecules that assembled my body were total waste. I mean, I felt like the epitome of a mess of a human being. So I say
Although
that
none of this was your fault, right? Like none of this, you didn't do any of these things. You sort of got lumped in with someone else and their bad behavior, right? But I
yeah,
think this is what happens. We take all that on, right? We're like, "Oh
yeah,
my God, I'm the failure. I'm the," right? And it's not our baggage to take, but we still do, right? Especially highly sensitive people like us.
definitely. Yes. I was not at fault for that. But at the same time, I was paying the consequences for someone else's behavior, which I was very angry about. I was very angry about me having to hold everything. A lot of people, women who are in single parent dynamics, they have child support. Sometimes they have alimony. They have another parent, which I'm not saying is easy, but I had to hold all of it by myself. And also trying to navigate all of the extra things about, of course, so much criticism, losing the friends, being judged, rumors being spread that had complete non-truths, that had nothing to do with anything that was actual truth that people believed. And it was, the most trying situation I have ever been through. And being someone who is so deeply, sensitive and hurt by those things, just amplified it that much more. But I'm someone that, even though I did feel hopeless and helpless and just the epitome of darkness, my kids were the only reason why I stuck around, because I absolutely had those suicidal thoughts. Is this even worth it? I felt like I'd be doing people a favor by not being around. You tell yourself all of those things. But thankfully, I did stick through, and I had this stubbornness about me. I might have felt like I was a massive failure, but I had this stubbornness in my bones and my DNA, that I was like, you know what, this will not be the end of my story. I Sometimes I say it through gritted teeth, because I was spoken to when I was a child through gritted teeth, like, and so sometimes I get that fierceness, and I am like, this will not be the end of your story. This is not your destiny. This is not how things end for you. Like, I don't even know where this came from. I feel like it was this. I'm very spiritually connected. My spiritual journey looks very different now than it did from what I was brought up. But I was given these little brief looks into my future, and I was given these, like, in my mind's eye, I saw myself speaking on stages, and I saw myself singing, and I saw myself making this huge impact in the world at some point in my life. And I remember God speaking these things over me, and I was like, are you not, like, do you not see what's happening? Do you not see the massive mess that, like, my life is? And he would give all these stories. What about David? What about Job? What about Joseph? Was a huge one that he would bring to me over and over. He was abandoned by his family. He was abandoned by his closest friends. He was put in prison for things that he didn't do. He was massively judged, all these different things. And he was like, I raised him up. Second command literally saved his family through him. And all these things were spoken over to me. And so it was kind of this could that be true? Could my life be like that? Could I be someone that could somehow turn all of this into something incredible? And I don't give myself the glory. I do believe that, it was a higher power that really lifted me up through those things, even though it was the hardest thing to go from one day to the next day. Just existing one more day was so hard, but I did it. And the only credit that I give to myself, and that I feel like this is important to say, because I feel like we're taught to be super humble, which is great, but there's a difference. There's a difference. Just because you're confident does not mean that you're narcissistic, doesn't mean that you're, full of yourself or pious or think you're better than anybody. You can be confident, and you can have humility at the same time. And we get to choose to partner with what God wants to do in our lives, or however you want to term it, source, spirit, universe, whatever. There was a higher power that I do believe strongly was helping to support me, to carry me through. And I partnered with that. I made a decision to say, this is not going to be how my story ends. I'm choosing to hold on to some sort of hope that things could look different for me, and that maybe these things that I felt were spoken over my life could somehow someday be manifest. And that started to change how I behaved, the choices that I made, and ultimately the entire trajectory of my life from that point forward.
Wow. So how long ago was that?
Uh, Prison was 2015.
Okay. So it's been 9 years.
Yeah.
So walk us through. I mean, I love this idea of having a higher power. And I love what you said about partnering
Mm.
with what your higher power has intended for you. Because I think sometimes we have this sense of a higher power, and it's very, like, parental. And I love this idea of partnership, right? That I have an opportunity to partner with you to have you guide me on what's next, right? But I still need to take the action, which means sometimes I'm going to be in front of my higher power and sometimes they're going to be in front, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I love that idea. So, how did you get to where you are now?
That's been a huge
To
journey.
like one day at a time.
Yes, absolutely. One day at a time. But I mean, there has been a process, even though I didn't really, when you're going through it, you have no idea what you're doing. And it really is just navigating one day to the next. And I get asked this a lot because they're like, how in the world did you make a complete 180? I was an emotional eater, a stress eater. So I had ballooned to almost 300 pounds. It physically hurt to exist just walking. I had to have my kids help buckle my high heels. I'm not proud of that. And I mean, I was a hot mess in every sense of the word. And then, to fast forward to today, people see what I've made of my life and that I am in no way really the same person. My heart is very much the same, but I am someone who has developed a very strong confidence and who is, in some people's terms, successful. I mean, success can look like many different things, but, I've built a business where I work for myself. I support my family on my own. And so my life does look completely different in every way, physically, mentally, emotionally. I mean, I'm human like anybody else. I have bad days. I still have stuff that happens. But if I look back, I am able to at least notice certain things that helped transform my life. And I will say that it really did start with taking that honest assessment where I had to be you just there's no easy way around this. You have to things have to get worse sometimes before they get better. And a lot of what I see people do, and I've also done it, I'm not judging it, but I see people placing a lot of blame. And of course, blame can be placed. Yes, we are victims, many of us, of things. But until you take radical responsibility and until you stop placing blame, we've done the blame thing. We've done it, you know, that's cool. But if you really want to get past something, from my own personal experience, I found that you have to take radical responsibility, sometimes even to a level of discomfort. And so I really had to do that honest analysis
Think
of my
always
life.
to a level of discomfort. Like, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think it's always to a level of discomfort, right? Like, radical responsibility is always radically uncomfortable. And I think it's okay for us to say that, right? And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think I just feel so strongly about that because we're like, oh, it's a little, it's not. It's radically uncomfortable, and
No,
that's okay. That's the process, right? We have to be uncomfortable before we can move through. So,
please interrupt anytime you want. Um, Always, that's okay. And yes, it's important. If I was to say one thing, I would say you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. You have to. If you really want to change your life, discomfort has to become something that you actually welcome, that you're not pushing away from. Because in order to do that inner work, and doing the inner work takes so much courage, it takes so much bravery to sift through the parts of yourself that you don't want to have to acknowledge. To have to acknowledge that I was someone who was deeply insecure, to acknowledge that I was someone who, um, obviously, I wasn't responsible for these things happening, but I did attract these people into my world because of certain parts of myself that were. I'm not shaming it. That's I think the thing that we do. We don't want to address it because we attach shame to it. So if you can somehow detach the shame from the parts of yourself that have led you to make the decisions that you've made, that have put you in the situation that you're in or have been in the past, that's a huge part of it, because so many times, including myself, I was running away from my past. I wanted nothing to do with my past. I wanted to not talk about it, which is completely the opposite of what I'm doing right now. And I don't like this. It's not fun for me. I have no personal gain whatsoever in doing these things. But I think that one huge part of my journey was learning to reframe how I saw what happened to me, learning to reframe how I saw myself, because I remember getting to the point, I would literally look at pictures of myself and I would feel so much disgust. I would have so much negative things that I would say to her. Like, how could you have let yourself get like that? How could you have made such stupid decisions, and all of this negative self-talk? And I could barely even look at pictures of myself, not just from the physical view of how I felt about the shame I felt about my body, but also just who I was as a person. I felt so much shame about, and I just wanted nothing to do with it. And then, as I was on my personal development journey, which was a huge part of what I would tell someone, is that the mindset is everything. It's so cliche, but it truly is. Your mind will shape how your life unfolds. There's no other way around it. And what you tell yourself will actually like manifest. So if you're always saying, I'm like this, I'm fat, I'm ugly, I'm a loser, I'm this what there's no other way that it can turn out. It's just going to happen that way. So you really do have to learn to talk to yourself differently. Even if it feels fake, you're going to feel like an imposter, and you can't go from saying, I hate myself to I love myself and believe it. That's not going to work. That's why so many times affirmations don't actually work. It's counterproductive, because when you feel like it's a lie, you're actually affirming the negative side. So you have to, one thing I've learned is that you have to actually slowly say things that you can believe. So it might not be I love myself. It might be like, okay, uh am I proud of every decision that I've made? No. Can you believe that? Yeah. But I'm figuring it out as I go. I'm learning a little bit at a time. And I like the thought that, maybe things can get a little bit better. Can you believe that? Okay. Then that's something that can actually start to head you in a positive trajectory. So a lot of it has to do about like changing how you talk to yourself.
And I think also, I love that, but I think it's also changing the actions that you take, because sometimes you can't believe it until you take the action first. So it's like acting as if that were the truth. So you can say, how would I act if I were a successful, smart, not that I'm smart, but if I was a successful, sober, sane, organized individual, or whatever it is, right? I'm thinking about it from a recovery perspective, because most of us are like just lost when we first come in, right? What would a sane, sober, completely confident, fully embodied woman do right now? And the universe will give you that message, and then you have to go do it, even though you're like, nope. Like
Totally.
when your fear is going to say nope, and you just go do it anyway. Because even like that, I think that's one of the other reasons why sometimes affirmations don't work, is because we don't believe them yet, so we don't take the action. But if you do the action and then you see it, you see the result, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that affirmation does work. I am that person. I am that person who can go and whatever it is, whatever that big scary thing is,
I
because
love
you
that
have to
you
do it
brought that
scared.
up. Yeah, I love that you brought that up, because the only way to build courage and self belief is when you can do the thing, show yourself that you did the thing. That's the only way that you can build belief in yourself. If you lack self trust, it's because you have repetitively not done something, or done it and then flopped and then you stopped doing it. So you've destroyed the trust that you have in yourself. So what you just shared is what I consider almost like the cheat codes that I've tried to, tell people if they're like, you know what, I really want to change my life. And so many people will say, oh, it's a huge process. And yes, it can be. I've definitely had my huge process part of my life where I have gone through all kinds of stuff that took a long time. But if you want the cheat codes, if you want to really know how to do this rapidly, because I truly believe that change can happen rapidly. You can quantum leap every part of your life. You can quantum leap your health journey. You can quantum leap your mindset transformation, your physical transformation, your anything that you want to transform does not have to freaking take a lot of time. Yes, it can, but it can also happen very rapidly. This is something I mentioned. I've been a singer in the past, and it's something that I'm stepping more into now. A lot of people in the artistic, creative community have this mentality where it's almost like an alter ego. You've heard, I think Beyonce has talked about this. There are so many people in that creative community that will take on, and some people think this is weird. Whatever, I don't care. It works. You can take on this like alter ego part of yourself, and just like what you were talking about, because sometimes the alter ego is a way for a person to bridge the gap. It doesn't mean that this, so I'm using my hands here. Let's say this is you now, right? And the alter ego side of you is the highest form of yourself, like you were just saying. So I'll have people do an exercise where you sit there and you journal, or you meditate, whatever it is that you want to do, and you say, my highest self. And then you ask these questions and you say things like, how does she talk? How does she walk? How does she dress? Where does she eat? How does she treat her body? What do her relationships look like? Um, you can ask yourself all kinds of questions, like, if she's triggered, how would she respond to a trigger? What type of clothes would she wear? How would she spend her time? How does she handle fear? What does she do for a living? How much money does she make? What is her bank account balance? Where does she go on vacation? I'm telling you, it's so interesting to me how when you ask yourself this question, the answers come so fast. For most people, they know. It's like when you picture the smartest, most evolved, most successful, most confident, whatever, when you picture that version of yourself, it's so amazing to me how clear people get when they start asking themselves those questions. So here's the thing. You're here, and this highest version of yourself is over here, and you're seeing this big gap. So if this is like your alter ego side of you, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is like the most amazing expanded, highest version of me, but I'm right here right now. The more that you can look at that list and say, the highest version of me, oh, she dresses in something cute. She's walking kind of confident. She's putting on her lippy, and she's really holding some boundaries. It's like the more of those things that you can literally hop over to here and try this person on, then you're being that person right now, even though you might feel like there's a gap between who you are right over here and who she is over here. But that doesn't mean you're not her. You feel like you're not her. You feel like she's an imposter because you haven't fully embodied all of those qualities that she is. But that doesn't mean that it's a lie. It doesn't mean that it's not authentic to you. This is actually the highest, fullest expression of you. This is fully you. And even if you don't feel like you have bridged that gap, the more of those qualities that you can, it's not fake it till you make it, because that this is you. This actually is you. This over here is the imposter, if anything was. This version of you over here is the version of you that people have told you that you should be, that you've been trying to be because of society, conditioning, beliefs, childhood, all of these things that you've taken on that actually aren't you. That's who this is. So the more that you can shed off of this version of you, the more you will actually shift in. So it's not that you're actually becoming this part of you, you're actually unbecoming this part of you so that you can really embody this part of you. And that happens as a process. It is a process. You're not going to be able to do it all at once. But what I would do is I would be like, the most confident person of me, the most embodied person of me would show compassion, would show grace to myself and others. And for me personally, this is just me. I don't like looking like a schlumpadinka. On one Oprah episode, she referred to a schlumpadinka as like the stay-at-home mom that's like wearing the bun in her sweatpants or her yoga pants and just kind of looking like she gave up on life. And I was like, I don't want to look like a schlumpadinka. So I got rid of my
Slumpadinka.
schlumpadinka. Yes, it's a thing. So I literally went through my closet, and even if I wore the stuff, I started asking myself, how do I feel? Even if it's comfortable, even if it's useful, I threw out all the stuff that I just feel in my body that I'm like, ew, I don't like how I feel when I wear this. And I started dressing in things that I felt cute. I felt sexy. I felt confident. I walked, with my shoulders back. I walked with I'd walk in a room like I owned the room. And it's not because I was being fake. It's just like, is kind of fun. It's kind of like, ooh, I'm playing this character as my highest self. And how does that look? And when you do it, it feels so amazing because you're actually being the fullest expression of you, even if it's for that short period of time. And then over time, day by day, you start to like lose a little bit more of that imposter. You start to really like lock into this. This is actually me. This actually feels really amazing. And you don't even like to be like this anymore because it doesn't feel like you. You start to feel like this more and more of the time. And it is a process, but it's a process that the more that you can just lock into it and just act as if, the more that actually creates that version of you. That's how that version of you is actually created. But I feel like articulating it this way can really help people go like, oh my gosh, I can actually choose to do this so fast. It does not have to take all this time. You can be that person before you are that person, which is actually what creates that person.
Yeah. Yeah. God, I feel like I could talk to you all day. You're so inspiring. Like, I just think we all have these things that we go through, but just, knowing you now, and I've been in that same situation, right? But knowing you now, it's so much more fun to be able to see who you are now and be like, yeah, badass, you go, like you made it, like you made it through. So if somebody wants to find you, where can they find you? Where can they be part of your world? I know you've got a couple Instagram accounts, so I'm not sure which one we want to send people to. So tell me.
Yeah, I mean, I have my business Instagram. I'm not here promoting my business at all, but you can find me on Instagram as
Promote your
the.
business, girl.
Oh, it's okay. I mean, my business is Iconic Femme. I currently do branding and design and content creation, all that stuff. But for me, myself, just me being me as Mindi, as the Fenix, you can find me on Instagram as the Fenix. It's FENYX. That's also my website, thephoenix.com. And Facebook, I'm the Mindi Show. So I'm everywhere. If you just, look me up, I'm there, and it'll probably be links in the show notes or something. We don't know.
It'll be somewhere. It'll be in the show notes. But thank you so much. I feel like, again, we could talk all day. Thank you for sharing your story. And I want to honor your bravery for sharing this. It's uncomfortable. I do it too, right? It's so uncomfortable and it's so vulnerable. And you're like, oh God, what are people going to say? And is that all that judgment going to come back? And it takes a really special person to be willing to say, I believe so deeply that this is going to help somebody else that I'm willing to be uncomfortable right now, right? I'm willing to take the action of being uncomfortable so that I can help, even if it's just one other person who's in that situation, who's going through it, who can go, if she can make it through and look like the badass that she is and be the badass that she is, then I can too. And so I just wanted to honor you for that, because it's a lot and it's scary. And I appreciate you being willing to do it here on Bosses with Baggage. And I can't wait to see what happens in your life over the next couple of years. I'll have to have you back in a few years and you can talk more about how, your life has evolved, right? And how that embodiment into who you really are evolves over time.
Thank you so much.
So
It's been an
thank you
honor.
again.
And yeah, we're just scratching the surface, right? It'll be fun.
It'll be fun. Mwah, mwah, mwah. Thank you for listening to Bosses with Baggage. We are honored that you chose to spend your precious time with us. I hope that you are feeling inspired to reframe your setbacks into your superpowers so that you can change not only your life, but the life of everyone around you. If you enjoyed today's podcast, and I sure hope you did, please subscribe, rate, and share on your favorite podcast listener. And if you have any ideas for a future guest, or you need some help growing your business, I'd love to connect with you. You can find me directly on my website, which is sherrysutton.com, SherrySutton.com. We'll see you next time.